Oh God, I guess we got to talk about this press thing, don't we? We do. I want to talk about the United States' continued justification, even though there is some talks in the Biden administration about sending longer range missiles that could be strapped to F-16s, and there seems to be a $130 million investment with Lockheed Martin in the production of these to try to invest in production, what does suggest positive developments. And they're talking about retrofitting, looking into retrofitting it onto these jets. I would call it retrofitting, but I mean fitting it onto these jets. It's not retrofitting if they were designed for these jets. And as this is happening, the Biden administration's continued position, as the Ukrainians were advancing in Kursk, is that long-range strikes on Russia using Western weapons instead of the Ukrainian drones that are not as powerful, not as accurate, not as quick, and more likely to dodge air defense and Russian aircraft that would shoot it down, that they cannot use it because it would be escalatory, even after the Ukrainians cross the border into Kursk and invade Russia. Now, I want to show you a White House official, a Pentagon official, actually. I believe it's the Pentagon. Pentagon official. Yes, I forget her name, but I've seen her before. Describing why they continued to hold this position after a reporter asked, why are long-range strikes on Ukraine still viewed as escalatory?
We believe the best way that they can be effective on the battlefield is by knitting those capabilities together and continuing to push forces back to regain their sovereign territory. That doesn't necessarily happen by doing long-range deep strikes within Russia. And of course, we're worried about escalation. So just because Russia hasn't responded to something doesn't mean that they can't or won't in the future. And that's something that the administration is always weighing.
Okay, so first things first. It is true that it would be a current escalation of current policy. But let's also acknowledge that the Russians feel no restriction on anywhere striking Ukraine in any way and anywhere, or really any target after the Children's Cancer Hospital bombing. And after that, when the Ukrainians were asking for permission, they were still denied to strike the air base that Children's Cancer Hospital was hit from. And so there's a philosophy, and I'll just try to describe it very simply. Shoot the archer, not the arrow. If you continue to expend resources when you have a shortage of air defense, like the Ukrainians have short to medium to long range air defense systems, and they're not going to be quickly solved, like there's not some big shipment coming over, then they have to find another solution to protect their civilians first, to protect their military assets, and also to protect their soldiers on the front line that are being bombed with these glide bombs that are devastating. I've been in buildings that have shook from these glide bombs, and it could be half a kilometer away and it'll still shake your building. It'll level entire apartment blocks, and they are being launched by jets from air bases in Kursk and Belgorod and near the border within like 250 to 300 kilometers, a little bit more, within range of these weapons that we're talking about giving the Ukrainians that could do work destroying these jets doing this damage. And her philosophy of like, it doesn't necessarily support pushing the Russians back. Bull. It's just bull. How is that possible? How would it not help to make it so that the Russians cannot glide bomb the Russians uncontested? The Russians can't glide bomb the Ukrainians uncontested. How would it not be useful to make it so the Russians are having more difficulty in striking against Ukrainian logistics, or for them? For example, and this is just a bonus, okay? And some might say that, it's not as strategic, but I would consider this a bonus. Stopping the bombing of cancer hospitals or other medical infrastructure. I filmed other hospitals, trauma wards and otherwise, that have been bombed. There was also, of course, the bombing of the hospital in Mariupol, the bombing of the drama theater in Mariupol, and many, many other bombings. Point is, I don't think this position holds up to any scrutiny. I don't think it makes sense when she says it doesn't push them back. I don't think it really morally holds up, considering what the Russians don't like. I think bombing a children's hospital is escalatory. They bombed it with a KH-101. Those things are accurate. It was not intercepted. It hit it directly. That, to me, should be considered a escalation because of the target that was hit. It was horrific. Now, they've done it again and again and again, but that one was particularly horrific, and it was done blatantly. It was not, because the Russians were like intercepting it. It was blatant. We can't read the Russians' mind as to why they did it, but why is that not talked about as an escalation? And how do you respond to it? How did we respond to it? There has to be some response. And if we are not able to provide them with all of the munitions necessary to shoot down the arrows, then you've got to disable the archer. And we can still keep restrictions that would encourage the Russians. We can hedge our bets here a bit. We can still keep restrictions that make the Russians feel like, if we were to escalate this with, for example, nuclear weapons, which is the thing we're all scared of. It's not the only thing, but one of the big things we're still scared of. One of the big dice the Russians have, even though obviously expanding this war when they can't even beat the Ukrainians and the Ukrainians are invading them for the first time since World War II, does not sound like a surefire way for civilizational success. They still have that card. If we were to just say, Ukraine can strike bases with our missiles that are engaged in combat operations in Ukraine, this would have two effects. Number one, it would not only be able to take these jets out, and that would be helpful for the Ukrainians, but it also would disincentivize the use of air bases as military objects against Ukraine. So the Russians would think twice before being like, oh wait, should we do a bombing run from this air base? Maybe if we stop, then the Americans will will say, oh, you can't hit that air base anymore. There could be a way you could move this so you could still have diplomacy, and the Russians, you can hedge your bets a bit. And then on the other angle, outside of the hedging of the bets you can make here, there's also the obvious strategic advantage that is being made. You can also make it so that there is somewhere that they know that we can escalate from. That, hey, the restriction right now is that they can't strike these other bases. And so if that's the restriction there, they're going to be discouraged from escalating. And while also doing immense damage to these Russian air bases and Russian jets that are doing these bombings. It just makes much more sense to me from their perspective. You can disagree with my policies. You can disagree with my, what I say we should do. But from what they are saying is the goal, if it's pushing the Russians back, disabling these air bases has a clear strategic benefit. And you can still put restrictions that can help hedge your bets on escalation. I really, honestly speaking, the Biden administration can no longer justify this to me, especially in the fallout of what's happening right now, especially since it could be even more useful than usual, since the Russians are redeploying their jets to engage in glide bomb attack against the Ukrainian units in Kursk, as well as the Ukrainian units in Toretsk, which is under immense pressure right now. So I don't think they can justify it anymore. I don't think the Biden administration can justify this. Okay, there was one point I forgot, but I just kind of slipped through my fingers. Let's see.